Damien Hale was smiling before the judge even finished speaking. Not a relieved smile. Not the shaken gratitude of a man who had survived ruin by an inch. No. This was something uglier. Something polished. The smile of a man savoring not justice, but conquest. The courtroom lights poured down in cold white sheets, catching the smug angle of his mouth, as if even the room itself had been instructed to frame him beautifully. He leaned back in his chair, one ankle over the opposite knee, fingertips brushing the gold edge of his cufflink, while across the aisle Vivien sat utterly still. Then, as to the disposition of the marital estate, Judge Whitmore said, voice clipped, "The court finds insufficient credible evidence to support the petitioner's allegations at this time." At this time. 3 simple words. But Damien heard only victory. A quiet laugh slipped out of him. Low. Rich. Contemptuous. The kind of laugh that made heads turn. His attorney tried to place a warning hand on his sleeve, but Damien shrugged him off without even looking. His eyes were on Vivien now. On the woman he had once promised to protect. On the woman he had spent the last year trying to erase. "That's it?" he murmured, just loud enough to be heard. "All that drama for nothing?" Vivien did not move. That restraint only seemed to delight him more. In the gallery, a few people exchanged glances. Reporters leaned forward. Adriana Vale, seated in immaculate cream beside Damien's mother, crossed her legs and smiled into her phone as if the ending had already been posted, captioned, celebrated, monetized. Judge Whitmore lifted her gaze. "Mr. Hale, control yourself." Damien rose anyway, smooth as a man accepting applause. "Your Honor, forgive me. I'm simply relieved the court can still distinguish evidence from emotion." A hush spread through the room. There are moments when arrogance no longer looks like confidence. It curdles. It glitters too brightly. It begins to smell like blood. Vivien finally lifted her eyes. No tears, no plea, no trembling. Just one steady look, calm enough to be unsettling. Damien mistook it for defeat. He gave her a small, private smirk, the kind men wear when they think they have buried a woman so thoroughly she will never rise with her own name again. And that was the fatal mistake, because while Damien Hale was already celebrating the end of her story, Vivien Nerant Hale was waiting for the door at the back of the courtroom to open. And when it did, his smile would be the first thing to die. Outside the courthouse, Damien did not behave like a man who had merely won a procedural advantage. He behaved like a king returning from war. The marble steps blazed beneath the noon sun, cameras flashing against the pale stone, microphones lifted like offerings. Damien descended them with infuriating leisure, his navy suit cut to perfection, his silver tie gleaming, his mouth still curved in that victorious half-smile that made him appear both handsome and merciless. Adriana met him halfway down, touching his arm with rehearsed devotion. The photographers loved it. Of course they did. Power beside beauty, triumph beside spectacle. "Mr. Hale," someone shouted, "do you consider today a full vindication?" Damien stopped precisely where the light hit best. "I consider today," he said, adjusting his cuff, "a reminder that false accusations collapse under scrutiny." The phrase was prepared. Elegant. Poisonous. He did not say Vivien's name, which was somehow crueler than saying it. He spoke as if she were already beneath formal mention, reduced from wife to nuisance, from partner to failed claimant. Around him, people scribbled. Phones lifted higher. His attorney tried to keep the statement brief, but Damien was drunk on the sound of himself. "I've been patient," he continued, "extremely patient. There's a difference between heartbreak and fraud, and I'm grateful the court can still tell the two apart." Adriana smiled with downcast lashes, then leaned in to whisper something that made him laugh. A hard, satisfied, public laugh. At the top of the steps, Vivien emerged flanked by her counsel. She wore no sunglasses. No theatrical grief, just a pearl gray coat over black silk, her posture so composed it almost insulted the circus below. But Damien saw only what he wanted to see, a woman forced to watch him rise higher after attempting to destroy him. He turned toward the cameras again, deliberately offering them his profile. "It's unfortunate," he said, voice softening into counterfeit regret, "when someone can't accept that a marriage has ended. But weaponizing the legal system because you lost control of the narrative? That's another matter." Several reporters glanced toward Vivien. It was strategic cruelty, every sentence crafted to suggest instability without stating it outright, every smile a blade wrapped in velvet. Damien had always preferred refined humiliation to obvious brutality. It allowed him to feel civilized while he was crushing someone's throat. That afternoon he hosted a luncheon in a private room at L'Etoile, the kind of restaurant where flowers arrived fresh before dawn and the waitstaff moved like disciplined ghosts. Crystal glittered, champagne rose pale and eager in narrow flutes. Damien's inner circle filled the room, investors, social acquaintances, his mother Celeste in emerald silk, and Adriana shining beside him like an accessory selected to replace the old one. A framed copy of a glowing business magazine profile, Damien Hale, the architect of modern luxury finance, had been positioned near the bar by someone with either devotion or fear. "To resilience," Celeste said, lifting her glass. "To truth," Adriana corrected, smiling. Damien laughed. "To consequences," the table answered with approving murmurs. He enjoyed them all the way a pianist enjoys obedient keys. He retold the courtroom exchange twice, each version a little sharper, a little grander. By the second telling, Vivien had become not merely mistaken, but hysterical. By the third, she was a tragic opportunist who had underestimated him completely. "Did you see her face?" Adriana asked. Damien leaned back, savoring his own memory. Blank. Which is worse than crying. It was the face of someone realizing she has no move left. No move left. He repeated the phrase like a toast line, and the room rewarded him with laughter. Then came the final indecency. At dessert, as gold-leaf chocolate arrived under sugarwork too delicate to survive the truth, Damien tapped a spoon against his glass. The room quieted. "I should say one thing clearly," he announced. "I never wanted this level of ugliness. But some people mistake kindness for weakness. Vivien spent years benefiting from my name, my network, my protection, then thought she could turn around and paint me as a villain because I refused to remain in a dead marriage." He paused, letting outrage ripen in the room. "She forgot," he said, smiling into the candlelight, "that I built everything she stands on." There it was. The creed beneath the performance. Not love ended. Ownership asserted. He believed he had authored her life, financed her dignity, arranged the very floor under her feet. And if he had built it, then naturally, he believed he could unbuild it too. More laughter. More glasses raised. Meanwhile, Vivien sat alone in a silent car crossing the city through shifting strips of shadow and gold, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. Damien was toasting a funeral. He simply did not understand that the corpse in the room belonged to his own future. While Damien crowned himself with victory, Vivien was doing what arrogant men never notice until it is too late. She was being quiet with purpose. There is a kind of silence that belongs to weakness. Trembling silence. Retreating silence. The silence of a person pressed so hard against the wall they begin to disappear into it. And then there is Vivien's silence. Measured. Curated. Exact. Months before the courtroom spectacle, when Damien first started arriving home scented with another woman's perfume and the smug impatience of a man already rewriting history in his head, Vivien had understood something essential. She was not facing a husband in moral collapse. She was facing a strategist who believed charm was evidence, money was absolution, and humiliation was a legitimate instrument of control. He had begun carefully, almost elegantly. Restricted access to shared financial statements, delayed signatures, misplaced trust documents, conversations held just out of her range, ending when she entered the room. Then came the subtler violence, the smile when he corrected her memory in front of others, the polished implication that stress had made her confused, the way he started referring to assets built during their marriage as my holdings and my legacy. Vivien had watched and learned. The first person she called was not her attorney. It was Elena Marrow, an old forensic accountant she had once met at a philanthropic board dinner. Elena had the face of a professor and the instincts of a battlefield surgeon. She listened for 15 minutes, asked only 7 questions, and then said, "If he's this confident, it means he thinks the paper trail belongs to him." Vivien stood by the window of the townhouse Damien had already started describing to brokers as transitional property. "And if it does?" Elena's voice remained calm. "Then we find the trail he forgot to erase. That became the beginning. Not frantic revenge, not melodrama. Architecture." Vivien stopped reacting in front of Damien. She apologized when it served her, withdrew when he expected outrage. She let him believe his gaslighting was working, because men like Damien become sloppier in the presence of what they assume is surrender. Every time he underestimated her, he loosened another stone in the wall protecting him. She began cataloging dates in a leather notebook she kept hidden inside an old music folio no one had touched in years. Transfers. Travel. Names. Corporate shell references overheard during one-sided conversations. A vineyard acquisition that vanished from discussion. A charitable foundation expense that did not match its filings. An offshore retainer hidden behind interior design invoices. Damien thought elegance made fraud invisible. In truth, it simply made it expensive. Elena followed the numbers. Vivien followed the behavior. Then came Julian Cross. He was a junior legal and compliance analyst at one of Damien's affiliated firms, bright enough to notice patterns and young enough to still be wounded by conscience. Vivien met him by accident first, or so Damien would have believed. A rain-heavy evening. A museum donor reception. Julian at the edge of the room, drink untouched, watching Damien charm trustees while texting furiously under the table. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at Vivien's private post office box. No return address. Inside, photocopies of 3 wire summaries and 1 sticky note. He thinks no one compares revisions. He's wrong. Her hands did not shake. That was the remarkable thing. They simply became colder. The documents were not enough to destroy Damien. But they revealed method. Dates altered after filing. Beneficiary structures changed in secondary drafts. Entities routed through temporary consultants. It was the signature of a man who assumed everyone below him was either too intimidated or too dazzled to examine the seams. Vivien arranged the next contact through Elena. A church garden. No cameras. No phones. Julian arrived pale, collar damp, eyes darting. "If he finds out," he said before sitting, "he'll bury me." Vivien looked at him steadily across the stone table. "No," she said. "He'll try." Something in the precision of her tone studied him. He told them what Damien had done, not merely moved assets, but staged absence. He had shifted money through layered entities months before filing for divorce while publicly claiming liquidity pressure. He had prepared narratives for the court before arguments even began. He had laughed about it once, Julian said, in a conference room after too much scotch, telling a partner that judges see emotion first and paperwork second. "Make her look dramatic," Damien had said. "By the time anyone understands the numbers, the order will already be signed." Vivien closed her eyes for exactly 1 breath, not from pain, from confirmation. Still, she did not strike. Because revenge without timing is just anger wasting itself in public. She let the first hearings proceed, let Damien posture, let him and his attorneys attack the admissibility of what little she offered early. Let them call documents incomplete, contextless, speculative. Let the judge tire of the appearance of marital vendetta. Every dismissive glance from Damien only deepened his dependence on the illusion that she was losing. Meanwhile, Elena was building the latticework beneath the floorboards. Subpoena crosslinks, beneficiary maps, reconstructed ledgers, secure affidavits, a chain of revisions that could survive not only scrutiny but hostility. Vivien learned every page as if memorizing a final aria. She did not need to perform outrage anymore. She needed to survive the moment truth entered a room full of people already leaning toward power. Then, Gabriel Thorne stepped into place. For years, Gabriel had served as executor and discreet counsel to Vivien's estranged maternal grandfather, Lucien Nurant, and old money industrialist Damien had dismissed as sentimental, irrelevant, and useful only when his name opened doors. Damien never understood the Laurent family because he believed wealth existed to be displayed, not positioned. He thought Lucien's distance from Vivien meant disinheritance. He never imagined distance could be strategy, or that silence within old families often hides arrangements no one outside blood can read. 2 weeks before the final hearing, Gabriel arrived at Vivien's apartment carrying a slim black case. Inside were sealed documents, trust amendments, witness certifications, contingent control transfers, and one final page that made Vivien stare for several seconds before she breathed again. Damien had spent a year trying to strip her of power she appeared to have. All the while, the power that actually mattered had been moving silently toward her name. "Are you certain?" she asked. Gabriel's expression did not change. "Your grandfather was." For the first time in months, something flickered in Vivien's face. Not triumph. Grief sharpened into purpose. By the morning of the hearing, Damien believed he was arriving to preside over her collapse. He never understood that Vivien had not come to defend herself. She had come to let him finish performing before the curtain fell. On the morning of the final hearing, Damien moved through the courthouse like a man walking through property he already owned. His confidence had become almost architectural. It occupied space. It altered oxygen. Junior associates straightened when he passed. A clerk hurried to hold the corridor door, and Damien thanked him with the benevolent nod of a prince receiving service he considered natural. He wore charcoal this time, not navy, more severe, more judicial, as if he wished not merely to win, but to visually harmonize with authority itself. His tie was black silk. His watch, platinum. His expression devastatingly composed. Any surprises? He asked his lead attorney as they entered the consultation room. "Nothing material," the attorney replied, though his voice carried the thin edge of a man who had learned Damien did not tolerate uncertainty. Opposing counsel filed a supplemental notice, but the record basis looks weak. Damien smiled. Of course it does. He poured himself mineral water and did not drink it. That was his favorite form of dominance, touching what he did not need. Owning without consuming. He reviewed nothing twice because men like him confuse familiarity with mastery. Around him, pages turned, tablets glowed, staff exchanged controlled murmurs. Damien remained loose, conversational, almost amused. Adriana had sent him a message minutes earlier. "Dinner at Valmont tonight. Wear the blue one. Let the city see you survived her." He laughed softly and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Survived her. What a charming phrase, as if Vivien had ever truly threatened him. When she appeared at the far end of the corridor, Damien noticed first what was absent. No visible desperation, no swollen eyes, no frantic paper clutching. She wore ivory under a black coat, minimal jewelry, hair pinned cleanly back. The stillness around her was so complete it almost read as indifference. He decided instantly that it was dissociation. "Vivien," he said, stepping into her path with polished courtesy. "You look tired." She met his gaze. A lesser woman might have filled the air with anger. Vivien gave him almost nothing, and that unnerved him for half a second before his vanity rescued him with an explanation. She had accepted the outcome. "That can be freeing," Damien said softly. Acceptance. Her attorney shifted, but Vivien lifted one finger, barely, and silence held. Then she said, "You should save your voice for later." Damien's smile deepened. "There won't be much left to say later." "No," Vivien replied, "there won't." He watched her walk away and felt a bright current of satisfaction move through him. Even her defiance sounded thin now, he told himself. Scripted. Hollow. The last elegance of a defeated woman trying not to fold in public. Inside the courtroom he settled with exquisite ease. He whispered an aside to counsel. Signed a note. Smirked when a journalist entered the gallery. Each detail seemed to confirm his command of the narrative. The judge had been impatient with Vivien before. The record favored him. His team was prepared. The public mood had already tilted. Control, at its most seductive, does not feel like tension. It feels like certainty. And certainty is most dangerous exactly 1 second before reality introduces itself. Damien looked once across the aisle and found Vivien adjusting a single page in front of her with immaculate precision. No trembling, no collapse, only that infuriating calm again. He almost laughed. He thought he was watching the final movements of a woman losing everything. In truth, he was watching someone make sure the blade was aligned. The hearing moved with the crisp, brittle tempo of institutional ritual. Objections. Clarifications. Rulings clipped into the air like paper cuts. Judge Whitmore listened with her usual severe restraint, glasses low on her nose, expression reflecting nothing Damien could use. Vivien's counsel attempted one more introduction of financial discrepancies. Damien's team dismantled the presentation with sharpened efficiency, foundation, authentication, chain, prejudice. Every weakness was struck before it could root. Damien felt himself rising internally with each successful interruption. Not relief, satisfaction. The darker kind. Performance rewarded. At one point, the judge exhaled and said, "Counsel, unless you intend to produce something materially different from what this court has already reviewed, I will not indulge repetition dressed as urgency." A quiet ripple moved through the room. Damien turned his face just enough for Vivien to see the smile. There it was again, that insufferable smile, curated at the corner, subtle enough to deny if accused, cruel enough to wound if received. The smile of a man who wanted not only to win, but to be witnessed winning. When the court paused briefly before recess, Damien rose and crossed the narrow space near the counsel tables under the pretense of speaking with his attorney. Instead, he stopped beside Vivien, close enough for her to hear his breath. "This is over," he murmured. "You should have taken the settlement." Vivien did not look up immediately. She finished aligning the edge of one document with another as if order itself mattered more than his voice. Then, finally, she lifted her eyes. "Is that what you think this is?" she asked. He gave a low chuckle. "I know what it is." His gaze traveled over her face, searching for cracks. He found none, so he sharpened the knife. "You were impressive once," he said. "But you confuse being poised with being powerful. They are not the same. That should have landed. On almost anyone, it would have." Instead, Vivien's expression changed so subtly it would have escaped a lesser observer. Not hurt, not anger, pity. It irritated him instantly. Before he could press again, the bailiff called for order. Damien stepped back, buttoning his jacket with leisurely elegance. Then he made his final mistake, not to Vivien, but to the room. He turned toward his side with a smile so open, so satisfied, so prematurely victorious that even the court reporter glanced up. "If this is their last stand," he said, not quite whispering, "I expected a better ending." Adriana, seated in the gallery, lowered her sunglasses and smirked. Judge Whitmore re-entered. Chairs shifted. Papers settled. The atmosphere tightened. Damien sat down like a man about to receive confirmation of what he had always believed, that intelligence belongs to the loudest strategist, that composure belongs to the winner, that truth can be managed if one reaches it first. He folded his hands. The judge opened the next procedural matter. And then Vivien's attorney rose. "Your Honor," he said, voice suddenly steadier than before. "Before the court proceeds further, the petitioner moves to introduce a witness whose testimony directly affects the integrity of these proceedings." For the first time that day, Damien's smile faltered. Only slightly, just enough for fate to recognize where to begin. The courtroom changed before anyone spoke. It was not visible at first. Nothing dramatic, no thunder, no gasp, no cinematic interruption of the ordinary world, just a shift in pressure, as if the air itself had drawn a sharp breath and chosen not to release it. Judge Whitmore's brows lowered. "Counsel," she said dryly, "this court has little patience left for theatrics." Vivien's attorney did not sit. "Nor do we, Your Honor." Which is precisely why this witness matters. Damien felt annoyance before he felt danger. Annoyance was easier. Safer. He leaned back, lips parting in a small scoff, ready to enjoy whatever desperate improvisation Vivien's side was about to embarrass themselves with. "Name?" the judge asked. The attorney looked toward the rear doors. "Mr. Gabriel Thorne." The name meant almost nothing to the room. But it meant something to Vivien, whose face remained composed, and it meant something else. Something delayed, half-buried, vaguely unpleasant to Damien. Not enough yet to frighten him, only enough to irritate some old instinct he had chosen for years not to examine. The back doors opened. Gabriel Thorne entered without hurry. He was not flashy. That was the first problem. There are witnesses one can dismiss instantly because they arrive performing importance. Gabriel did the opposite. Black suit. Minimal movement. A face carved into discretion. He crossed the courtroom like a man who had spent a lifetime carrying the private consequences of wealthy families and had long since stopped being impressed by display. The gallery stirred. Adriana frowned. Damien's attorney leaned in. "Do you know him?" Damien kept his eyes forward, not materially, but the answer rang false even inside his own skull. Gabriel took the stand, swore in, sat. Vivien's attorney approached with careful restraint. "Mr. Thorne, please state your occupation for the record." "I am private counsel and fiduciary administrator for the Laurent estate." There it was, not a blow. Not yet. Just the first crack under Damien's feet. He masked it with a dismissive exhale. Lucien Laurent was dead. Estranged. Symbolic. Damien had already accounted for every practical branch of that family tree, or so he believed. Old money liked ceremony. Ceremony produced documents. Documents produced posturing. He could handle posturing. "Did you know the petitioner, Vivien Laurent Hale?" "Yes." "And in what capacity?" "I have known Miss Laurent since childhood. More specifically, I was entrusted by her grandfather, Mr. Lucien Laurent, to oversee several contingent instruments affecting her legal and financial standing." Now the room was listening. Judge Whitmore took off her glasses. Damien's attorney stood. "Your Honor, relevance." "Sit down," the judge said, not loudly, which made it worse. Gabriel continued with the same grave steadiness. "Mr. Laurent executed a sequence of sealed directives and trust amendments over the last 6 years. Certain instruments were designed to remain dormant unless specific triggering conditions occurred." Vivien's counsel asked, "And did such conditions occur?" "Yes." "Please explain." Gabriel opened a black folio. Paper moved with a crisp, devastating sound. Among the triggering conditions were documented financial concealment by a spouse, attempts to coerce or diminish Miss Laurent's independent rights under marital review, and any demonstrable effort to publicly discredit her through fraudulent evidentiary positioning. The words landed one by one, not like accusations, but like door bolts sliding into place. Damien sat motionless. Inside him, something cold turned. His attorney was already on his feet again. Objection. This is a narrative construction, and Gabriel turned his head slightly. Would counsel prefer the certified copies first? A small sound escaped the gallery. Not laughter exactly. Recognition. Judge Whitmore extended her hand. The bailiff collected the packet and carried it forward. The judge read. The room waited. It is a terrible thing. The silence that follows arrogance when it finally encounters a document it cannot charm. Damien tried to assemble explanations. Estate maneuver. Family theater. Protective language with no legal teeth. He told himself this while watching Judge Whitmore's face lose its impatience and become something much more dangerous. Attentive. What exactly, she asked, are these instruments alleged to establish? Vivien's attorney answered before Gabriel could, that Miss Laurent is not, and never was, dependent on the respondent's financial power in the manner repeatedly implied before this court. Further, that several assets represented by the respondent as individually controlled or strategically superior are directly entangled with interests he did not know he lacked authority to leverage. Now, Damien stood. Not from principle. From reflex. That is absurd. Judge Whitmore looked up with a chill that stripped the word of usefulness. Mr. Hale, you will remain silent. He sat, but not fully. His body seemed unwilling to trust the chair. Gabriel resumed. Mr. Laurent had reason to believe certain parties around Miss Laurent misunderstood both her legal exposure and her inheritance posture. Accordingly, the controlling documents were designed to become visible only if concealment, coercion, or reputational sabotage reached formal adjudicative proceedings. The judge's eyes sharpened. Visible to whom? To the court, to designated auditors, and, where necessary, to regulatory bodies. That last phrase rippled outward like poison in water. Regulatory bodies. Damien's mouth went dry. He glanced at his attorney. The man no longer looked calm. Vivien had still not moved. How? That became the loudest question in Damien's head, not what, but how. How had she kept this hidden? How had no one told him? How had Lucien Laurent, that distant old relic he had dismissed over port and inheritance gossip, managed to place a live charge beneath proceedings Damien believed he controlled? Gabriel was not finished. With the court's permission, Vivien's attorney said, "We would also like to call Julian Cross." Damien's head snapped toward the rear. Julian entered like fear wearing a navy suit. The sight of him hit harder than Gabriel's testimony, because now the threat was not ancestral mystery or estate complexity. Now the threat had a face Damien recognized from conference rooms, compliance summaries, elevator nods. Small, useful, forgettable, or supposed to be. Julian took the stand with visible shaking. Damien stared at him in naked disbelief. No, he thought, no. Mr. Cross, counsel began, were you employed in a compliance capacity related to entities used by the respondent? Yes. Did you observe or review document revisions relevant to marital asset disclosures? Julian swallowed. Yes. Did those revisions accurately reflect the original records? A pause. The whole room seemed to lean. No, Julian said. The word was barely louder than breath, but it struck Damien like a weapon. Counsel placed documents on the screen, revision histories, draft comparisons, time-stamped changes, routing discrepancies, transfer structures bent into cleaner shapes after the fact. Elena Merrill rose next, introduced as expert witness, and explained the patterns with surgical clarity. Not emotional, not theatrical. Numbers, chains, inconsistencies, beneficiary shadows, false liquidity claims. Each explanation removed another layer of air from Damien's lungs. His lawyer objected so often the words began to sound frightened. Overruled. Limited. Proceed. Sit down. Judge Whitmore's voice hardened with every page. Then came the worst moment. Not the evidence itself, not the charts, not even Julian quietly admitting Damien had dismissed oversight review by saying, "By the time anyone checks the seams, she'll look unstable, and I'll look exhausted." No. The worst moment was when Judge Whitmore laughed. Once. Briefly. Disbelievingly. It happened after Damien's counsel argued that Vivien's earlier evidentiary efforts had been incomplete and therefore unpersuasive, as though that fact still somehow favored the respondent. The judge set down a document, looked at the sequence now laid before her, and let out a short, incredulous sound that carried farther than a shout. "Mr. Hale," she said, the edge of it nearly luminous, "are you telling this court you celebrated the rejection of partial evidence while the full evidentiary structure was still walking through my door?" The gallery erupted into murmurs. The bailiff called for order. Damien felt heat surge up his neck. "Your Honor, I was advised." "By whom?" Judge Whitmore snapped. "By your vanity?" A few people gasped outright. Adriana's hand flew to her mouth. Damien rose halfway again, then faltered, because his knees had turned strangely unreliable. The room had altered shape. Faces that once tilted toward him now stared with the fascinated revulsion reserved for public collapse. Reporters were no longer watching a successful financier fend off a bitter ex-wife. They were watching a man discover, in real time, that his performance had continued several acts beyond the point where he should have left the stage. Elena introduced the regulatory implications next. Trust triggered audit flags. Potential misrepresentation exposure. Interference with disclosure obligations. Material risk to board confidence. Material risk to lending relationships. Material risk. The phrase echoed like a bell struck inside Damien's skull. His phone, confiscated to silence, lay useless on counsel table. He imagined it vibrating with investors, with assistants, with Adriana, with panic. Gabriel then delivered the quietest and most annihilating truth of all. "Mr. Hale appears," he said, "to have operated under the belief that Miss Laurent relied materially upon his holdings, his income streams, and his institutional access. That belief was incorrect." Vivien's attorney asked, "Incorrect in what sense?" "In every sense that matters," he handed over the final certification. Judge Whitmore read for a long time. Then she looked directly at Vivien. "Miss Laurent," she said, and there was something like respect in it now, "is the controlling beneficiary and present executive authority over the Laurent Restoration Trust and its attached holding structures?" Gabriel answered, "Yes, Your Honor." Effective prior to these proceedings, with full activation contingent upon conditions this court has now seen satisfied. Damien blinked. The words refused to become meaning. Controlling beneficiary. Executive authority. Prior to these proceedings, his mind lurched, reaching desperately for purchase. If she controlled that trust, if she had controlled it before, then half his leverage had been theater. More than half. His threats, his settlement pressure, his public posture of economic rescue, the implication that she would crumble without his name, his funds, his network. All of it depended on her being smaller than he said she was, and she had let him say it. She had let him build his own humiliation out loud. "No," Damien whispered. It was not an argument. It was the first sound of a man discovering that reality does not revise itself to protect his ego. Judge Whitmore's gaze shifted to him. "Do you dispute these certifications?" His attorney spoke, but the sentences had lost muscle. "We request time to review." "You had time," the judge said. "You used it to gloat." Damien turned toward Vivien then. Fully. Desperately. For the first time all day, perhaps all year, he actually looked at her instead of at the reflection of himself he preferred to see in her face. She sat with hands folded lightly over the table, her expression grave, almost gentle. Not triumphant, not vicious. That made it unbearable. Had she smiled, he could have hated her cleanly. But this calm, this terrible calm, left him alone with what he had done. "You knew," he said, too softly for anyone but those nearest to hear. Vivien met his gaze. Yes. He stared as if the single syllable had struck him across the mouth. "And you let this continue?" "No," she said. "You did." His breath caught. Something inside him began to fracture audibly, not in sound, but in posture. The lift of the chest gone, the chin lowering, the shoulders no longer broad with command, but held stiff by shock. His carefully arranged face could not decide which disaster to wear first. Anger? Panic? Denial? He cycled through them too quickly, like a house losing power room by room. Julian was asked one final question. "Mr. Cross, in your observation, did the respondent believe the petitioner would be unable to recover if these proceedings damaged her reputation?" Julian looked at Damien with naked discomfort. "Yes." "And why?" "Because he said once," Julian replied, voice shaking, "take away the illusion that she can stand alone, and she'll take whatever is left." A silence followed that statement so complete it seemed holy. Judge Whitmore closed the file. When she spoke, every word fell with the weight of stone. This court will vacate its preliminary posture regarding credibility assessment. Further, the record will reflect serious concern over apparent concealment, manipulation of disclosure, and potentially bad faith exploitation of this tribunal. Damien's attorney started talking again. Words. Procedure. Review. Protection. Continuance. The judge cut through it all. "Mr. Hale," she said, "you entered this courtroom smiling at a woman you believed you had financially dismembered. It now appears the only structure dismembered here may be your own." No one moved. Damien did. His hand went to the table edge. He gripped it too hard. The polished wood offered no rescue. "This is insane," he said, voice cracking at the center. "This is a setup. Vivien, say something." There it was. Not Your Honor, not counsel, Vivien. Because when arrogant men finally fall, they do not first reach for law. They reach for the person they were certain they had made powerless. Vivien stood. The room seemed to rise with her. Her voice, when it came, was low and devastatingly clear. "You mistook my patience for helplessness. You mistook my restraint for fear. And worst of all," she paused, the silence slicing deeper than volume, "you mistook your ability to humiliate me for proof that you had authority over me." Damien shook his head, once like a child refusing cold water. "You told everyone you built what I stand on," she continued. "What you built was an audience for your own collapse." The words entered the room and did not leave. Adriana looked away first. Then Celeste. Then even Damien's attorney stopped trying to rearrange the disaster with language. Damien sat down because standing had become impossible. The smirk was gone. In its place was the raw, exposed face of a man watching every carefully curated myth about himself die under fluorescent light. And for the first time in his life, no one rushed to save him from the truth. Collapse is rarely a single moment. The spectacular break happens in public, yes. But the true ruin unfolds afterward, in layers, with humiliations too practical to dramatize and too merciless to escape. By evening, the headlines had already changed. No longer the elegant financier defending himself against an embittered ex-wife. No longer the polished survivor of marital scandal. Now he was a man under scrutiny for concealment, manipulation, and strategic deceit. Clips of his courthouse smirk circulated beside still frames of Judge Whitmore's incredulous stare. The luncheon photo with raised champagne flutes resurfaced under captions so vicious they needed no embellishment. Damien watched the first wave from the back of a car that felt suddenly rented, temporary, hostile. His attorney was speaking beside him, damage control, emergency filings, board outreach, containment language, but the words slid past as if spoken through water. His phone would not stop lighting up. Investors requesting clarification. 2 directors asking for an immediate private call. 1 lender's office seeking reassurance. 3 journalists, Adriana 6 times. His mother twice, then no more. By midnight, the first board advisory memo landed, pending review. Temporary distancing. Fiduciary concern. Reputation exposure, such delicate phrases, such murderous refinement. The following morning, Valmont canceled his standing table. That cut more deeply than he would ever admit. Not because of the table itself, but because luxury institutions are weather vanes of social death. They do not announce condemnation. They simply begin acting as if your presence creates inconvenience. At the penthouse, the silence was unbearable. The staff moved with a strained professionalism that made him feel observed in his own home. Adriana arrived in oversized sunglasses and anger disguised as care. "You told me it was done," she said, standing in the entryway without removing her gloves. "You said she had nothing." Damien, unshaven now, tie discarded, stared at her from the sitting room where news anchors were silently discussing him with captions beneath their mouths. She was supposed to have nothing. Adriana laughed once. Short. Disbelieving. Ugly. That is not a sentence powerful men are allowed to say after they destroy themselves. He stood too fast. "Don't? Oh, now you don't like humiliation in the room?" She snapped. The cruelty of it landed because it was true. 3 days later she was gone. No dramatic farewell. No tears. Just empty drawers, absent perfume, a final text routed through emotional cowardice. "I need distance from this chaos. Please don't contact me until things stabilize." Until things stabilize. As if collapse were a weather pattern and not the unveiling of character. Celeste fared little better. She came once, sat rigidly on the pale sofa, and delivered maternal disappointment with aristocratic frost. "You were always vain," she said. "I did not know you were careless." "I wasn't careless." Her eyes moved over him. Only careless men celebrate before the papers are finished. That sentence stayed with him longer than any legal warning. Then the financial unraveling began in earnest. Review holds, access restrictions, partnership hesitation, a pending acquisition paused for governance reasons, counsel fees rising by the hour, accounts once fluid becoming sticky, watched, procedural. Damien had mistaken wealth for freedom. He was now learning how much of his freedom had actually been borrowed from perception, and perception had left him. He stopped sleeping, truly stopped, not restlessly, not poorly. Stopped. At 3 a.m. he would pace the dark glass walls of the penthouse and see only his own reflection moving through the city he had once believed adored him. He replayed the courtroom in unbearable fragments, the judge's laugh, Julian's shaking voice, Gabriel's measured delivery, Vivien's calm. Most of all, Vivien's calm. It haunted him more than rage could have, because rage would have made her reactive, and reactivity would have let him feel central. But her calm had rendered him small. Weeks passed. He became paler. Thinner, the bright entitlement drained out of his features and left behind a man older than his years, a man confronting the bill for every performance he had mistaken for power. One rainy afternoon he saw Vivien by chance through the window of a Restoration Foundation building now operating openly under Laurent authority. She stepped out beneath a black umbrella, speaking with 2 directors and a preservation architect. No entourage of revenge. No theatrical victory. Just purpose. Elegance. Motion toward something larger than the wreckage he had tried to make of her. She did not see him. Or perhaps she did, and granted him the final humiliation of not acknowledging it. For the first time, regret entered him without self-defense. Not regret for being caught. Regret for the sheer grotesque stupidity of believing she was weak because she was dignified. Regret for every room where he had spoken of her as if she were a decorative extension of his own life. Regret for the exact moment he smiled in court, because now he understood that smile had not merely revealed arrogance, it had signed his ruin with his own hand. He lowered his eyes, rain threading down the window between them like a verdict no appeal could touch. Vivien did not build her next life out of his collapse. That was the part people understood least. They expected glittering vengeance, a triumphant interview, a public statement sharpened for the throat. Instead, she did something far more devastating to a man like Damien. She moved on without needing his ruin as fuel. Months later, the Laurent Restoration Trust stood at the center of a quietly transformative cultural initiative. Historic properties preserved, scholarships funded, legal advocacy expanded for financially controlled spouses navigating high-conflict divorce. Vivien chaired the board from a long walnut table under warm amber light, dressed in ivory silk and midnight tailoring, her voice calm, precise, and impossible to interrupt. She had not become harder. She had become clearer. There is a difference. The city now spoke her name without attaching it to Damien's. Invitations came addressed to Vivien Laurent, not as correction, but as recognition. Her power no longer arrived hidden inside old paper or waiting behind sealed triggers. It moved in daylight now, with grace and legitimacy and the quiet force of a woman who had survived public diminishment without surrendering her center. On the evening the final civil review closed decisively in her favor, Vivien stood alone for a moment on the terrace of the Laurent house, dusk pouring blue across stone balustrades, lanterns glowing softly below. She touched the rim of her glass, but did not drink. Some victories are loud because they are insecure. The deepest ones are quiet because they no longer need permission to exist. Inside, music drifted, laughter, low and warm. Not the laughter of mockery, not the brittle sound of people celebrating someone else's downfall. Something better. The sound of life continuing after deception has been named. Vivien lifted her gaze to the darkening sky. Arrogance always believes the story ends at the moment of its own applause. Karma waits until the applause is loud enough, and then it lets the room hear the truth. So if this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments. At what exact moment did you know Damien had celebrated too early? Do you think Vivien's silence was her greatest weapon, or was it his arrogance that truly destroyed him? If you were in that courtroom, what would have been more satisfying to witness, the judge's laugh or his face when he realized Vivien had known everything? And if you believe calm women are often the most dangerous women to underestimate, like, subscribe, and come back for more stories where pride rises high, only so karma can enjoy the fall.